Hello, I'm Florence, the MajorTim.space 2022 to 2023 age 7 to 9 Young Ambassador.
And I'm Myle Faraz, the MajorTim.space 2022 to 2023 Achievement Young Ambassador.
And today we're interviewing Poppy Northcutt, the first female engineer in Mission Control. Poppy, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Poppy Northcutt. I'm from Houston, Texas, in the United States. And back 50-something years ago, I was the first woman in an operational support role in NASA's Mission Control Center. I worked as a return to Earth specialist, doing trajectory work to bring the astronauts back to the Earth from the Moon on Apollo 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Mm-hmm. And me and Myle both have a list of questions to ask you. I'll ask the first one. When you first started working at NASA, they hired you as a computeress. Do you know why they were called this, and how was the job of a computer/computeress different to the job of an engineer?
Well, first of all, I wasn't hired by NASA itself. I worked for a contractor. In fact, most of the people that worked in the space program then, as well as the people that work in the space program now, actually work for contractors rather than the government agency, NASA. The job title that I had when I was hired in was called a computerist. I was very surprised by it because I thought, this is weird, a gendered computer. And I was unfamiliar with the history of that title. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, I don't know if y'all have seen that or not. The women that are featured in that movie are also called computeresses. Apparently, that title has some history behind it, going back at least into World War II, when women were used in cryptography primarily, doing mathematical calculations, actually sort of functioning as human computers. The difference in the job, the number one difference was the difference in terms of pay and in terms of status. The job of computerist, it was a women's, basically a women's job. It was paid at a lower level. The promotional opportunities were, considerably less and so forth. I changed status. After I was there at the company for about a year, I became a member of what was called a member of the technical staff. We functioned as engineers. Some of us had math degrees, some had physics degrees, some had engineering degrees, but we were sort of generically referred to as engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Hidden Figures, did you personally know Katherine Johnson?
No, I did not. Katherine Johnson was in Langley in Virginia, which is about 1,000 miles away from Texas, okay? And I know that she worked in the space program for quite a long time, but she was always more in the Washington, D.C. area, the Langley, Virginia area, than in Houston.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. When you started working at NASA, was it difficult being the only woman in mission control?
Well, by the time I was over, as I said, I worked for a contractor, okay? And we were not physically located on NASA's property. We were across the street. And so I wasn't dealing day to day necessarily with the whole with NASA itself. I was working on a particular project on Return to Earth. Now, in the company that I worked for, which was called TRW, once I was promoted from being a computerist to being a member of the technical staff, when I was first promoted, I was the only woman who was a member of the technical staff. Later on, I think there was one more. But women in engineering over at NASA, I never dealt with any women, in terms of working with our contract with NASA, I never interacted with any women or saw any women at that level at that time. There might have been some somewhere, but women were very, very scarce at that time. Was it difficult? Yes, I mean it was difficult. I mean the main difficulty was getting there in the first place. It just the presumption about women that they didn't do technical work and things like that made it particularly difficult. When I first went over and was in the Mission Control Center, again, I was the only woman in that environment, but I was accustomed to being the only woman at that point on the technical team. So difficult, yes, but at the same time, I was sort of accustomed to it.
What was the general public's reaction to you being the first woman working in NASA's mission control?
I got letters from all over the world. I got letters from young girls all over the world. I got letters from adult women as well. I got letters that said things like, I didn't know women could do this kind of work. And that's part of the reason why I agreed to be interviewed as much as I was at the time, is I thought it was important that young women know that they could do things like this, so that there were some women working in the space program, and that women could do this technical work. One of the most amazing stories, though, for me came much later. This was back maybe 3 years ago, as they were coming up on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. I got a phone call from the Brazilian consulate here in Houston, and the phone message was that that there was a Brazilian woman, at the Jet Propulsion Lab in California. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with that. You probably are, but that's where they run all the interplanetary stuff, uncrewed. The missions are run out of JPL, and that she wanted to talk to me for some reason, and they wanted to know if they could give me her contact information. I thought, this is a very odd message because I don't know any Brazilians. I've never been to Brazil. They told me her name, Rosalie Lopez. I didn't know her, and I didn't know anyone at JPL. So I thought, this is very odd. But I got on the web and I looked her up, and I was amazed at what I found, because she's like one of the leading planetary scientists in the world and holds the world record for discovering live volcanoes, most of which are on the moons of Jupiter and places like that. So I was very intrigued at that point, and I called the Brazilian consulate back, and I said, yeah, you can give her my information, have her text me, and we'll set up a phone. So a few days later, I actually talked to Rosalie, and what she told me was that when she was 13 years old in Brazil, she saw a picture of me and a story. The picture was of me in mission control, and that inspired her to go into planetary science. And she wanted to thank me for being that inspiration. And I thought that was really remarkable as a testament to how important it is for girls and women to, girls and, for people to see people that look like them, okay? To open their eyes that they have opportunities and possibilities that maybe they hadn't considered. Just an amazing thing to think that just seeing someone's picture in a story in a newspaper could really change the direction of somebody's life. I think it's exciting to see the two of you, for example, because neither of you, when I was back in the space program, would exactly fit the model that I was seeing when I walked in mission control.
Who was your inspiration growing up?
Well, I didn't really have any particular inspiration, especially not in terms of the space program. I never expected to go in the space program. I never planned on that. I went to college. At that time, the expectation for women in the United States, and I think perhaps in most of the world, was that you were expected to get married, have a family, and be a housewife, okay? And if you went to college, for example, and maybe worked, that the kind of work you would do would be, you'd be a secretary or a nurse or a teacher. So I had figured I would probably be a teacher, but I didn't have a particular role model or a particular inspiration. I just sort of stumbled into it.
Okay. Has the number of women working for NASA and in mission control significantly increased from the low number when you were hired, and when do you think? And do you think there's still a lack of women in NASA?
I do think there's a lack of women still. And you keep saying NASA, and I want to always remind people, it's not just NASA, okay? NASA is the smallest part of the space industry, okay? It's not just the commercial things either, like SpaceX, the commercial flights. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that work in the space industry for private companies like Boeing and Lockheed, and just tons of them doing all kinds of different things. So the number of women has increased. It would almost have to have increased, because at the time I was there, it was almost zero. Okay. So of course there would be more after that point, but it's still quite low. And in the area of computing itself, at the time that I was working, when I was in my 20s in that industry, there were a fairly large number of women, percentage-wise, doing computer work. It was about 36%, I think, at that time, back in the 60s and 70s. And my understanding is that now it's actually dropped off, and there's only about 18 or 19% women in those industries of computer science. In physics and in those other scientific disciplines, yes, it's increased. But it's still extremely low, probably less, probably 8-10%. So it's very low. But they're certainly more visible than they were before. In fact, there have been women who've been the flight director, not just flight controllers, but flight directors of some of the missions, especially in various things. I know there's been several women that have been flight directors and held prominent positions in some of the uncrewed interplanetary missions that have been done out of JPL, as well as some women in you'll see some women visible in the International Space Station in those control centers as well.
Mm-hmm.
What does it feel like to be part of space history?
Well, I was really surprised as we came up on the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 at how much attention there was to it. Not to Apollo 11, but how much attention there was to me. So that was surprising. I went on and became a lawyer after I worked in the space program, and was very involved in doing that work, as well as in working for women's rights in general. So I've always been fortunate in being involved in things that are sort of newsworthy and pushing the frontiers. It was great, though, to work in the space program. It was a very challenging field, and it still is a very challenging field. And I'm very excited that it looks like we're going back to the moon, and perhaps, I hope, on to Mars, because I had already had already started working some on going to Mars at that time before we started having the cutbacks.
Okay. What simulation?
So I have a question for y'all. I've been reading that y'all now have a spaceport in Cornwall.
We're actually gonna have.
You're going to be launching out of Cornwall, right?
Okay, I actually did not know about this. How
You
did I
didn't
not
know about this? Well, you know, you're going to be launching. I think they were supposed to have their first launch, I think fairly recently, within the last month, I believe. And they had some technical difficulties and it didn't happen. So they're regrouping. But yes, you've got a big space center going up in Cornwall. So I was wondering if y'all had been there and what you could tell me about that and how exciting that is for Britain to become a spacefaring nation.
Sadly, I did not
have no idea.
Yeah. My family are, the kind of forget about it ones. They're the kind of people who will forget if you tell them, like, if I say I want this for my birthday, like months before my birthday, they'll forget. It's kind of that. But honestly, I did not know. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, you're gonna have some people that you need to talk to from Britain, okay? Launching on that. You can look it up on the web.
Yep.
How about you, Myle? Did you know about the spaceport that
I had no idea.
The construction in Cornwall? You had no idea. Wow. Okay. Maybe you should get on Twitter.
I'll ask the next question. What simulations will be tested on each space mission, and would you say these were significantly different from the real space flights?
Oh, right. You have simulations, lots of simulations before you actually fly, or at least we did at that time, and they were very intensive. And the main thing about the whole purpose about simulations is that you're trying to build your team, okay, so that they work together well, and also to learn how to deal with things that go wrong. Okay, so the thing about simulations is that you can almost count for sure that things are going to go wrong, okay, because that's the whole purpose of the thing, is to learn how to deal with these, with problems that come up. So simulations are, very, very tiresome in the sense that, you know that stuff is going to go wrong, that you have to be paying attention all the time, and that you may have to, jump in and act on various things. So they're very challenging. And, because when you do simulations day after day, that's the environment you're in. When you actually fly the mission, there's far fewer things that go wrong, thank goodness. So it's actually usually more tranquil to fly the mission than it is to deal with the simulations.
What was the most stressful time in your career?
Well, I've had a lot of stressful times dealing with a lot of different kinds of stuff. But in terms of working over in mission control, I think for me personally, the most stressful was the first time when we were in Apollo 8, the first time the spacecraft went behind the moon and did that first maneuver to go into lunar orbit insertion. And the reason that was stressful, and I think that any time during a mission you have things that pattern going on, you have to remember when they go behind the moon, you don't have signal, so you have no communication with them, and you have no tracking data. It's blocked by the moon. So that was really the first time that we had lost contact with the crew for any length of time. You have a brief blackout period when they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, but that's very brief. So they're behind the moon 20, 30 minutes, okay? And you don't know what's happening at all. They're going to do a major maneuver back there. And if something goes wrong, you won't know about it right away. And, by the time you see them again, hopefully you do see them again, by the time they come back on the other side, if something significant has been wrong, it may be too late to fix the problem. Okay. So that's the most nerve-wracking part of it, is that they're behind the moon, they're doing a major maneuver, and you don't know what's happening. That first maneuver that they did behind the moon, they have clocks going. There's several clocks in the control center that you can see that are counting down. So there was a countdown clock telling us when we should get acquisition of signal. As it comes down to 0, you can hear the Capcom calling out, waiting for them to respond. This is Houston. This is Houston. And they were late responding. And the calculations on these things are extremely precise, but they were late in responding. So, everyone was just holding their breath as they saw that clock, go down, and then there was no answer when they were calling out. They weren't terribly late in responding, but we're used to such precision in things that it seemed like forever. As it turned out, everything was fine when they finally tracked and everything. But what had happened, and the reason that they seemed to be late in responding, is that there are mass concentrations of the moon that changed the orbit just a little bit, and those had not yet been mapped. Those weren't included in the calculation. In future missions after that, they were right on the money in terms of coming out. That's how much the precision was. But that was definitely the most nerve-wracking part. Every one of the missions, that's the place where you worry a lot, is that those maneuvers when they're behind the moon and you don't know what's going on.
What was the first thing you knew about the problems with the Apollo 13 mission, and were you involved in the landing of the crew's safe return?
The program that I worked on was originally called the abort program. And that's really what it was designed to do. That's the heart of the problem that we were given, was to come up with a program that could calculate abort trajectories. In other words, trajectories to get the astronauts safely back to the Earth from the moon, whatever the circumstances were. Now, obviously, there's some circumstances you can't deal with. If they don't have any fuel, you can't get them back. But the first I knew of it was I was at home. I was not in the center. I had flown to Florida and actually watched the launch. I didn't go into work at the center until they were closer to the moon, because I was a specialist in doing what are called moon-centered maneuvers. So I had just gotten back from Florida, and I was at home. I wasn't supposed to go in yet, because that explosion happened while they were on the outbound leg to the moon. They were still reasonably close to the Earth at the time it happened. I got a phone call from a newscaster, a television caster. Um, and that's the first I knew about it, was he wanted to know, were they going to have to fly around the moon, or were they going to be able to turn around and just come directly back to the Earth? And I asked him, I just wanted to know how far out they were. He told me that, and I told him the answer. They're going to have to fly around the moon.
Did you have to work a lot harder than the men to be recognized for what you did?
I think probably yes. I mean, but as I told you at the beginning, the hardest thing was making the leap out of that women's only box that they had at that time. That was the hardest part. Okay. I mean, after you made the leap, it was not that difficult. It was not that demanding, but just getting out of that stereotypical box in the first place, that's what's hard.
What is the most exciting mission that you've overseen?
Again, I think, well, I mean, obviously 13 was very exciting, okay? Because, it was, this disaster kind of thing. And we were having to be on the edge of our seats, the whole time back, not knowing exactly what the cause was, and not knowing the extent of the damage to the vehicle. That was the scariest part. So until they were actually safe on board back at Earth, I don't think anybody felt comfortable. What I worked on, our trajectory work, just worked fine. We didn't have really major problems with the trajectory. That mission, most of the major problems were environmental. Keeping the capsule, for the crew capsule, at a reasonable temperature and their oxygen supply going. Okay. So, they had environmental problems. That's the challenge for most of the people there. But I always thought that the most challenging mission, in terms of the way it was designed, okay, not in terms of what happened during the course of the spacecraft, spaceflight, that Apollo 8 was a remarkably challenging mission. And that was because it was really the first time that we left the Earth, the gravitational pull of the Earth, to the extent of going to another celestial object. And we were using a whole variety of spacecraft software as well as hardware in that mission that had not been extensively tested. So it was, I think, the most challenging technically when you talk about, where we were and where we were before and where we were afterwards in terms of that mission. That was a huge step. Now, obviously, Apollo 11 was also a huge step in terms of doing the actual landing part of it. But as an overall mission, I think Apollo 8 was the most challenging on the drawing board. 13 was the most challenging in operation as we were flying it.
Yeah. Myle, would you like to ask the next question?
Have you ever been on a zero-gravity flight?
I have. I was on the zero-gravity flight 2 months ago. It was fun. You'll have to try it.
How much is it?
How much does it cost? Is that what you meant? Yeah? I'm not sure. Somebody else paid for it, so I don't know.
Let me search it.
You can search it. I think they advertise the cost. It's pretty pricey, but it's definitely a fun thing to do.
I'm still gonna hope.
Yeah, that was my early Christmas present. Go on 0G. Yeah, that was great fun.
It is like $10,000. I don't own $1. Bye.
You studied maths in university, right?
I did.
How do they sort of accept you into aerospace engineering when you only had a maths degree?
Well, first of all, I mean, math is integral to all of the sciences, and certainly integral to doing trajectory work. And the the members, the technical staff, the technical people that work in the space program come from a variety of fields. Okay. I mean, many of them are engineers. Okay. Physics, astronomy, math. Okay, so there's a variety of fields, technical fields. One of the courses that I took when I was in college was called celestial mechanics. Okay, so there's a math discipline in a whole lot of this stuff. And also remember, at that time, I mean, there weren't people walking around who had already done returns to Earth from the moon. Okay. It's not like you could go to college and learn all of that because it hadn't happened before.
After you left, you then worked as a lawyer. What made you change your career, and why did you choose to study law?
Well, I mean, part of what happened was that they were doing cutbacks in the space program. And we weren't going to go to the moon anymore. I was really not interested in working on Earth orbital stuff because having worked on, lunar missions and even beginning to do work on a Mars mission, for example, I just was not very challenged by the idea of doing lunar orbital.
It's not
Earth
quite
orbital
the same
stuff.
Yeah, it's not
in
quite
terms
the
of
same
trajectory.
challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't challenge you in terms of. I'm sure that there are lots of challenges there, but it's not challenging in terms of orbital mechanics at that time. And the other thing is the company I worked for lost its major contract, as did many. There was just a big cutback, and so I had become active in the women's rights movement at that time. And increasingly was aware of discrimination issues and legal issues involving women. I had been on a national board of a big civil rights organization. So, I had just become very interested in legal matters. And that's a big part of why I decided to go to law school.
Did you experience discrimination while working in your role?
While working in the space program? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I mean, first of all, as I said, at that time they had these stereotypical roles that were women's jobs and that were men's jobs. The newspapers at the time, they discriminated in terms of even posting the jobs to start with. The newspaper listings for jobs where jobs wanted female, jobs wanted male. The discrimination was overt. Okay. If you go back and you look, women were not even allowed to apply to become astronauts. They were just rejected out of hand. Okay. At that time, you didn't see a woman, an American woman, as an astronaut for, until the 80s, I think. So, the discrimination was overt in the United States. And it was true. In the United States, for example, they did not pass the and a non-discrimination in employment law until not it didn't go into effect until 1964, and so I was a beneficiary of that to a certain extent. I feel sure in my mind that I would not have gotten promoted, for example, if there had not been a 1964 Civil Rights Act.
Yeah.
And the discrimination was in pay as well. When I was promoted, the promotion was delayed about 3 months. The operations manager in Houston was really upset about it. I was fortunate. I had somebody who fought for me. And I think a lot of people do not always have a manager who would fight for them. But my operations manager told me that he was not able, he had to fight to just get the promotion because the pay difference between what I was being paid as a computress and what I would be paid as a member of the technical staff was so large percentage wise, and that he could not get me. He thought that I should be paid higher up in that pay range for a member of the technical staff based on what I was doing, but he could not get that approved. He had to go through multiple levels above him in order to just get that promotion done because the pay differential was so great. And what he said was, I'm going to continue to try to give you more raises more rapidly and at the maximum level to try to get you up to where I think you should be. He said it would have been easier to have fired me and rehired me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just an indication of what happens to people when you have discrimination in employment. If they come in and they're discriminated when they come in, if they're not paid fairly when they come in, that will travel with them, okay? And they will probably never catch up, okay? Because, you just come in and it's just hard for companies to admit that they have, discriminated in the first place. So, they have trouble adjusting to that. And in this country, I don't know about in Britain, but in this country, we still have some of that problem.
I'll ask the next one. You're an inspiration for many people getting into STEM subjects. Who do you think is an inspiration or positive role model to young people in the 21st century?
Well, you now have a whole bunch of young women who are astronauts, okay? And I think all of those young women are inspirations to people. But you also have, women engineers, you have women flight directors, you have people like Rosalie Lopez that I mentioned, who's just a whiz at planetary science. And all of them are inspirations and will be inspirations to the future world. And I'm looking at both of you, and I think you will be inspirations probably to your peers as well as to people younger than you as they see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Myle, would you like to ask the next one?
I have no more questions left.
I think I only have one left. What do you plan to do next in your retirement?
Well, I'm not sure. I work a lot on voting rights. I do a lot of voter registration and work trying to get people out to vote, especially young people, because right now our young people do not register to vote at the same level as older people, nor do they show up to vote as much as older people, at least in my state. It's a problem throughout the United States, but it's a particular problem in Texas where I live. So I focus on doing a lot of that. I also go out and I speak to groups. There's a student, there's some some student groups on college campuses that are space oriented. And in fact, I'm going to go out to Texas A&M next week and speak there to those young people. Maybe if I'm in Britain sometime soon, we can go to Cornwall together and go see your new Space Lark Center.
Okay, I don't think I have any more questions left. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for this incredible interview. It's been great having you here. Really
well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you all send me a picture?
Yeah.
And I'll post it on Twitter and tell them that I got interviewed by these two great young people.
It has been very wonderful talking to you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, this. Star
Live
Trek.
long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.